Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Bubbling Issues Regarding Military-Connected Students. This is through the Multi-State Collaborative on Military Credit. We're sponsored by Lumina Foundation and Strata Education Network. And my name is Sara Appel, and I'm the Multi-State Collaborative on Military Credit Manager at the Midwestern Higher Education Compact. Just a couple of housekeeping topics. Please submit the questions through the chat feature, and we will do follow-up as necessary. So if we need to pause Lauren for a bit to answer a question, that's what we'll do. The mission of the Multi-State Collaborative on Military Credit is to facilitate an interstate partnership of 13 states and to translate competencies acquired by veterans through military training and experiences toward college credentials. States exchange information and share best practices in the areas of articulation of credit, certification and licensure, communication, and data and technology. Project goals: assist states and post-secondary institutions in aiding military-connected students with critical life transitions from the military to post-secondary education, and then from post-secondary education to civilian employment. Increase post-secondary education completion rates by creating models for the consistent, transparent, and effective awarding of credit for military training and experience that can be scaled both regionally and nationally, thereby lowering the cost of education and reducing the time to completion. Establish a strong network of support, communication, documentation, and data collection among institutions and organizations for the purpose of promoting shared interests and tracking the efficacy of efforts to enhance military-connected students' educational success. At MCMC, we have 4 knowledge communities: articulation of academic credit, communication and outreach, data systems and technology, and licensure and certification. We're happy to have with us today Lauren Augustine, who's the Vice President of Government Affairs at Student Veterans of America. And Lauren, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you for having me today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to get to talk about some of the things that we are expecting to see bubble up over the next year for military-connected students. A little bit about me, and then I'll tell you a little bit about SVA. I am our Vice President of Government Affairs here at Student Veterans of America. I am an Army veteran. I served in the Iraq War as a drone pilot and have been with the SVA team for about a year working higher education policy issues. Prior to coming to SVA, I worked veterans healthcare issues for an organization called Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America and Got Your Six. I'm excited to be with the team. I joined SVA after working closely with them on the Forever GI Bill and have enjoyed my time over the past year. A little bit on SVA. We'll go to the summary slide here. SVA is the largest chapter-based student organization in the country with over 1,500 chapters across the country and 4 chapters in nations around the world. The mission of SVA is to empower student veterans to, through, and beyond higher education. We really do that through sort of 3 main lines of effort. Number 1, and our most important, being our chapter support features. This is how we interact with our chapters across the country and around the world, making sure that they have the tools they need to succeed on campus. We support them as students. We support any Veteran Center directors, any processing, admin assistants, and anybody that touches the student veteran population. We try to do our best to support them. We also, our second line of effort is really focused on research on student veterans, and we do this as a data-driven organization to make sure that when we are working with chapters or we are advocating on Capitol Hill, that we are doing it with the best research that we can on our population. Our sort of trademark research project that came out about a year and a half ago now was the National Veterans Education Success Tracker, or INVEST for short. And what this really showed was the success of student veterans on campus, showing that they graduated at higher rates than their civilian counterparts. They succeeded on campus. They had wonderful GPAs. They were pursuing academically rigorous degrees. And it really makes the case for why we as a country should invest in student veterans. Our third line of effort is our advocacy work, and this is advocacy that includes my work here in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill and in the executive branch to the White House, VA, DOD, and Department of Labor. But it also includes advocating to our partners, so those employers that we work with, to make sure that they know the worth of an educated veteran population, and then also to schools to make the business case for why they should want to recruit student veterans to their campus. That's a bit about SVA, and we'll sort of dive into the meat and potatoes of our talk today. I did want to sort of just start off by addressing the elephant in the room. I've sat on a few panels over the last couple of months, and this is the situation around the Forever GI Bill that we saw from this past fall semester is the number one thing that gets brought up, with questions of how we got to that situation, what the plan is moving forward, and sort of our general thoughts on the situation. So I wanted to provide a little bit of background on the issue since we were heavily involved with it throughout the past year, and then we can go into a little bit more about what the future of the Forever GI Bill looks like. This is obviously a major accomplishment for the veteran community, and we want to make sure that it is successful for the long run, even as we hit a bit of a speed bump over the past 6 months. So backtrack about a year ago, SVA was brought into the VA to hear their implementation plan for the housing allowance changes within the Forever GI Bill. And the specific one that they wanted to brief us on was the section that requires students to be paid housing for the physical location that they're attending classes, not necessarily where the administrative building for the school is. It's a great provision. It obviously makes sense. You should be receiving BAH for where you're physically taking classes, not necessarily where the school happens to have its mail sent to. But what this led to was the VA deciding to use a very complex system to figure out what that payment should be. And they decided the best way to do that would be to use the actual zip code of every building for the classes each student was taking, which I wish I was joking. That's how they were planning on implementing that section. But they decided that zip codes were the best process. This would have required every school to go in and put in zip codes for each building that a student was taking a class. And I don't think I have to sort of overstate how complex and complicated that idea was going to be, and how burdensome that was going to be for students, schools, and the VA. So we wrote a letter back last spring sort of expressing our concern with their proposed plan, and asked them to reconsider their zip code use and to reconsider the use of extended facility codes that could be a little bit more detailed than the ones that were previously used. They said, no, we think the zip codes is the best plan moving forward, and we've got this. We've got it figured out. We're going to be able to implement the changes needed by the August 1st deadline, and it'll be fine. Fast forward to July, we continue to hear in a House Veterans Affairs Committee mid-July that VA was on track to be slightly delayed, but was still feeling very confident in their ability to meet the housing requirement changes by early August, and that schools should stand by and not submit GI Bill certifications until they received new word on how to submit the new claims under the new process. Fast forward to early August, just a few weeks later, we're asking, not just us, everybody in the community, from the House and Senate Veterans Affairs Committees to schools to other student organizations to other veteran service organizations, we're all asking VA nearly every day, when is the system going to be ready? It's past August 1st, semester starts any day, schools need to get these certifications in, students need to be sure that they're going to be paid. And VA finally came out and said, basically, just kidding. We do not have the ability to meet the demands of the Forever GI Bill housing changes under the zip code idea. We're going to ask schools to submit certifications under the old rules. It'll be basically as if Forever GI Bill had not passed, business as usual. Please go ahead and do that. And what that meant was, instead of VA receiving certification sort of trickling in over a several-month period, they received the vast majority of certifications all at once. So instead of having 6 months to process the fall semester payments, they got everything in one window, and it was quickly apparent that this bottleneck was going to create severe backlogs for processing those claims. we continued to raise concerns about the bottleneck and where things stood and the things that we were hearing from chapters and from schools about not receiving tuition payments, not receiving housing payments, and continued to raise that flag. And then finally, about November, an NBC story broke that really shed a lot of light. There had been media on it previous to that, but it had been military-specific media, and NBC was the first outlet to sort of hit the mainstream market that really shed light on this significant backlog VA was facing. And the great thing about the NBC article, combined with a letter that we wrote alongside with 14 other veteran service organizations, and a letter that came from several higher education organizations, was that there was finally the attention on the issue that it needed, and the secretary himself, the VA secretary himself, was engaged on the issue. And what that led to was VA's decision to press pause on their proposed implementation plan using zip codes and admit that they really needed to do a deep dive reset on their plan and sort of just start back over in the planning process and come up with a new way of thinking through how they were going to calculate housing rates and how schools were going to input those requirements. They called it their reset. And we were strong advocates for this reset because there was just a lot of confusion, there was a lot of miscommunication, there was a lot of concern and sort of unnecessary fear or necessary fear being spread around our community because people just didn't know what the spring semester was going to bring. There had been no great updates on the zip code changes and what that meant. So this reset was really an opportunity for VA to step back and say, wait a minute, we kind of missed the ball on this one. We're going to go ahead and admit that and look at how we can do better moving forward, and that's where the reset comes in. We had to go back and forth a little bit on how students would be repaid, but that's all been resolved. That has been repeated by the Secretary many times. Every student will receive back pay owed to them, and there will be no debt letters issued to students who are overpaid during this sort of mix-up between we should be under the new rates, but we're not. So once VA gets this new IT system up and running, everything owed to students will be given to them and no debt will be collected because of this Forever GI Bill housing change. Right now, VA is projecting their new reset plan to be implemented by December 1st of this year, which is a fairly aggressive timeline, given that it's around the same amount of time that they had to implement the changes to begin with. But they have assured the community that they're on track and ready to meet that need. In terms of exact timeline, we don't have a ton of that just yet. What we do know is that in the new year, the new plan was announced right at the end of 2018, and right as 2019 was beginning, they put out an RFP for a new contractor to build the IT requirements. They were supposed to have a contractor selected towards the end of January, mid-February, so I'm waiting to hear an update on if that contractor has been selected. And then we expect to see a robust work plan shared soon once that contractor is finalized so that we can do our best to provide oversight to the process throughout the year. One of the things that we've continued to call on VA to do, and we think that they have done a better job and hope to see that continue to improve, is their communication to the community about where things stand and what's happening. We want to be advocates. We all want to support student veterans and the VA, and nobody wants to see the system break for the sake of the system breaking. So we need them, and we've asked them, and they've committed to doing a better job of communicating both what is happening and what they need to be successful. So we're going to continue to sort of monitor that and provide oversight of the housing situation, and I'm happy to take questions on that if there are any. But beyond that, within the Forever GI Bill, there are two other remaining provisions of the bill yet to be, major provisions of the bill yet to be implemented, the STEM scholarships and the Vet Tech Act, which again we have asked repeatedly for VA's assurance and plan for how they're going to implement both of those provisions. We haven't seen any specifics, but we have been told that they are on track to meet the deadlines for both provisions, and we should see guidelines for the providers of vet tech, so those programs that would want to apply to be a vet tech provider, that those short-term sort of coding schools and the like. We were told that those should be out this spring with applications for students starting soon after that. We will continue to monitor that. Don't have much more other than VA has said they are on track to meet it, and we are encouraged that they have been more open and honest about other aspects of Forever GI Bill, and assume that they are being open and honest about those two provisions as well. Those are the major Forever GI Bill updates. Again, happy to take specific questions as best that I can on that. But there is a world outside of Forever GI Bill for SVA, which it feels like that might not be true some days, but it is. Looking forward to 2019, beyond our oversight of Forever GI Bill, we're really going to be focused on the higher education reauthorization efforts. As we've all sort of seen in the news, both the House and the Senate are fairly committed to a comprehensive review of HEA. It's overdue. We've been trying to do this for a number of years, but they do seem to be in a better place to maybe make this a reality this year. And one of the reasons why we're staying very committed on the HEA front is that student comes first in the student veteran moniker. And while the VA has a significant impact on the lives of our members, so does Department of Education and the things that are regulated within HEA. And we don't want to let that go under the radar and let things that are really impactful to the day-to-day lives of student veterans go unspoken for during the process. Some of the things that we're trying to do specific to military-connected students is just making HEA work a little bit more efficiently for military-connected students. I think the best example of this is we're really committed to getting the definitions of active duty. There's a number of different definitions for active duty throughout HEA, and we would like to sort of see all of those scrapped, and anywhere there is a definition, it refers back to sort of the code of jurisdiction. So in this case, it would be Title 10, which governs everything over at the Department of Defense. We'd like to see HEA. Anytime there's a mention of military, it just goes back to those definitions. And this is just to prevent sort of one area of legislation lagging behind another. So if Department of Defense updates their own definition and who qualifies for certain benefits under DoD, if HEA has an antiquated definition, anybody who comes in under a different role or title or code is going to miss out on some of those benefits. And so if we can just refer back to the title of jurisdiction, we think we can prevent some of those bureaucratic missteps for people moving forward. We'd also like to see some common sense things changed to better enable students to be smart consumers. So changing the master promissory note to something that's a little bit more obvious to what it actually is, like student loan contract. And there's some things that are pretty obvious for our population. Like we'd like to close the 90-10 loophole and count VA and DoD educational benefits as federal funds. We'd also like to preserve the gainful employment and borrower's defense rules, as we believe that those are strong protections for students moving forward. Happy to take questions on HEA. There's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack in the process. I'm happy to speak to that as well if there are questions. But beyond Forever GI Bill and HEA, we do have a number of other priorities that are important to us and are more perennial priorities that are always going to be something that are on our radar and things that we're pushing to address. At the VA specifically, we'd like to sort of take the opportunity now that we've seen sort of these large-scale overhauls of programs like Forever GI Bill, like the Mission Act, which deals with health care, and like appeals modernization, which deals with the disability compensation system. We feel like the time is right to kind of dig into some of the weedier issues that aren't splashy headlines, that aren't super fun things to talk about, but are necessary to make the VA a little bit more modern and work a little bit more efficiently. An example is creating an enterprise-wide contact database. This is something I actually just found out about a week ago, and I've been on a bit of a soapbox about it ever since because I kind of can't believe that it's a thing in 2019. But the VA right now has no VA-wide contact database for the veterans who are using VA services. So if I go as a veteran to see my VA compensation system. And where this is a problem for student veterans is that if I think that I've updated my address and then GI Bill office issues me a letter of debt for anything related to my GI Bill, it's going to my old address. Therefore, I'm probably not paying it within the 90-day window, and it's going to collections. And there's a number of things and examples that you can think of why a sort of VA-wide contact database is necessary, but those sort of modernization efforts are really important for us to take a look at now that we've got a little bit of oxygen in the room to talk about them on the VA committees. Some other things that we're looking at specific to education service or student veterans in particular are things like how can we modernize voc rehab and work study to work a little bit better for both the user and the taxpayer. Again, not super splashy or are going to be great headlines, but the time is right and the time is needed to have those conversations. We've also got some larger government-wide things that will always be something that we talk about and want to see. Things like greater data sharing across government, particularly between DoD, VA, and the Department of Education. There's a number of things that we can do better if we're just sharing data and sort of using that data in the best interest of the end user, that we can make some government efficiencies happen. I think the best example is when a service member is deployed, you can have your student loan automatically go to 0% interest rate. DoD knows who's deploying. Ed knows who has student loans. If those two systems could talk to each other, then we could see service members receiving a 0% interest rate without a whole lot of fuss or friction on the part of the service member while they're trying to deploy. So things like that will always be a part of our priorities and things that we're looking at. There is a renewed interest in data sharing and how we can better use data and technology to streamline things and make things more efficient. So we're hoping to sort of capitalize on some of that conversation and see what we can move forward to make things better for students and schools. And then lastly, another thing that we're sort of always looking at is how can we study emerging education initiatives or innovations to better understand effectiveness and move those models forward to a wider application. And that's obviously something as online learning continues to grow, we want to make sure that we are advocating for the best programs out there and the best new methodologies for teaching that can reduce barriers to entry to education. And something that will always be on our radar and things that we're excited about. And sounds like we are aligned in those fronts. And that's those are our top priorities for the year and the things that we're looking at moving forward. And I'm happy to take any questions that come out of that or anything that I didn't cover, anything that you would like to see answered, I'm happy to take now.
Thank you, Lauren. We appreciate your presentation. Quick question. Are there things that you believe our institutions can do to be proactive regarding these issues about data, about the HEA and those types of things? Are there policies we should look at or processes that maybe we need to look at in order to help our students?
Sure. So I will say there are a few things that I would recommend institutions look at. One that came out of the Forever GI Bill, and it's sort of a moot point now, but if you haven't checked out the SITREP Act, I encourage you to. It'll be something that impacts every institution. Most institutions were already abiding by the law, but what it essentially does is if you're accepting GI Bill dollars, you can't penalize a student for VA's delays. So if VA is delayed in sending tuition payments to the school, the student themselves can't receive any late penalties or be kicked out of classes. That's something that passed and is in law now. And like I said, almost all schools already had those sorts of policies in place, but it is now law. So I encourage you to check that out if you haven't already. That's a big one. One that comes up consistently that really is the best thing for institutions to look at is child care on campus and how institutions can help their student veterans, about half of whom do have dependents and families, be a little bit, have an easier access to child care. That's a very institution level policy that we don't really have a great way of tackling at the federal level, but if I have a chance to push it at the institution level, I always do, because it's one of the top things that comes up in our campus tours. And then lastly, on HEA, institutions who are a part of some of the higher education associations like ACE or APLU, those folks are incredibly focused on HEA and are the institution's voice on Capitol Hill on HEA. So if you're not already engaged with them, or if you don't know what information they're putting out on HEA, I encourage you to go to their websites and read up, talk to their government affairs folks, because they are the institutional voice on the Hill, and they're doing great things and should hear from you guys if you have concerns or questions specific to the institution level and HEA.
Lauren, we do have a question. Where can the SITREP be found? Is there a good website that folks can go to learn more about it?
Sure. So the best website for any piece of legislation is congress.gov. And there's a search bar in there, and you can just type in SITREP. It'll pop right up. It'll be the one that says became law, and you can read it on there. There's also been a number of news articles that have come out about it. So if you just Google SITREP Act, you should be able to find some news articles on it. But the best source for the actual legislation is always congress.gov.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions for Lauren while we have her expertise with us today? Lauren, are there other things that you foresee popping up? I know that in the past, as you have discussed on the webinar, that the folks at the VA have said we're going to have this done, and for whatever reason it doesn't get done on time. How do you feel that they are going to have everything completed in the time frame that they have agreed to, or are there things that our institutions can do ahead of time, again, to be prepared in case that doesn't happen?
I feel confident that they have a better chance of meeting their deadlines this year. I never want to say that without a doubt VA is going to meet their deadlines, or really any government agency is going to meet a deadline, but they do seem, with such a microscope over the issue, and the way that they've decided to reframe how they're going to calculate BAH rates using facility codes again is a little bit more in the realm of possible in the existing system, in the current system, and they seem like they're going to be able to meet that need. Now, the big outstanding question, though, is how are they going to process new claims once the system is in place, so presumably next spring semester, and how are they going to also re-adjudicate claims from the past year, from fall of 2018 through fall of 2019? How are they going to sort of do both of those needs in a timely manner, and how are they going to instruct schools to re-adjudicate those claims in a way that won't bog down schools? That's something that's still outstanding, and I think that if institutions are looking for things to be involved in or questions to ask, I would start asking that question. How are we expected to, or what is the plan to have us re-adjudicate claims in a way that doesn't create another bottleneck for both the school and the VA? Those are outstanding things that we need to still have answers to, and definitely something institutions should be asking moving forward.
Great. We have another question here. Is SVA doing any advocacy to encourage colleges, universities to evaluate military training, experience, and coursework into college credits?
This is something that we do encourage. We encourage universities to remember how, look at how they can capitalize and account for military experience. I will be very honest, one of the things that we also caution, though, is the vast majority of veterans, when they transition into school or into employment, do nothing related to the work that they did in the military. For example, I'm a perfect example. I flew drones for the Army, and now I'm a lobbyist. So the coursework that I did in the military doesn't necessarily help in any way for a master's in policy or public administration. And so we encourage schools to not only think through the direct relationship, but some of the soft skills that veterans can bring that can also help. So another great example, I was a sergeant. So I probably don't necessarily really need to take a Leadership 101 class, and maybe we can sort of think through some of the soft skills as well. So we certainly advocate for it in a responsible way that is true to the nature of veterans during transition, which is that they just really don't do a ton of what they did in the military. So we're mindful of that when we advocate is my only flag there.
Okay. Another question. Has the initiative to share data between VA once and National Student Clearinghouse effectively died on the vine in light of VA's recent problems?
Is this referring to the completion data that they're supposed to put out, I'm guessing?
Probably.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So it has not died on the vine. That has continued to be a conversation that we have alongside of several other VSOs and the higher education associations with VA. It hasn't died on the vine, but we have effectively gotten VA to recognize that the way they were going about putting that data out was a little bit irresponsible because it wasn't reflective of the reality of student veterans and their completion rates. And so the exact path forward for how that data will be figured out and then shared is still ongoing. Certainly not died on the vine, but nothing has been finalized or even close to solidified yet. So ongoing and will continue to be ongoing. And again, those higher education associations are really just phenomenal watchdogs in those conversations to making sure that institutions are served well when the data is put out.
Very good. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions for Lauren? We do have a comment from one of our listeners. I think this verbiage bill legislation required Chapter 30 and 33 to have in-state residency. Now Chapter 31 has been added. Any future intent to add 1606 or Chapter 35?
Yes. So we work closely with the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. They have taken up the Chapter 35 in-state as one of their top priorities for the year, and we're actually working with them in the House Veterans Affairs Committee to go one step further and make in-state tuition, talk about the reality or possibility of making in-state tuition a permanent part of the GI Bill in line with the forever aspect that we now have. Still in preliminary conversations, although when we've put that out to a few institutions through ACE, APLU, they've all been fairly receptive to the idea. So we're feeling that out, but absolutely pushing forward on Chapter 35 along with our partners at TAPS.
Great, great. Any other questions? We do have one regarding the data. Was it referring to the National Student Clearinghouse having a role in the certifying process, or is this different than the completion data?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I'm tracking that question. Could you repeat it?
Sure. So when you were referring to the National Student Clearinghouse, and this is in reference to when somebody asked if the project died on the vine, is this the National Student Clearinghouse having a role in the certifying process, or is it different than the completion data that NSC has been working on?
So what I was referring to was strictly about completion data that the VA has been mandated to pool and publish in some fashion. In terms of the clearinghouse as part of the certifying process, I have not been a part of any of those conversations, and so couldn't really speak to it, but happy to try to track down an answer.
Great. A comment, it says, my focus was on completion data, and this is from the person who originally asked the question, but automatically populating data in VA once would certainly reduce our workload, and can't argue with that. Some of our institutions are having to verify, thousands of students, and having that would be an awesome feature in saving them time and giving them additional time to work one-on-one with students if they have questions or need some answers to what they should do regarding their college career. So that would be great if it would populate into VA once as well.
Duly noted. I will take that down and include it in our conversations around VA modernization. One of the things I should also mention is we're pushing pretty hard to have VA articulate what they would need for a robust IT overhaul, both infrastructure and software. When one of the House Veterans Affairs Committee staffers went to the regional office to watch them process GI Bill claims, the computer crashed 6 times trying to process one claim because the actual infrastructure, the wires coming into the building, just couldn't handle the workload. So another great recommendation, taking it down, and we'll include it in our conversations around modernization needs in VA IT.
Very good. We have a generic question. Is SVA planning to release any more outcome or graduation statistics or research documents this year, like the INVEST report?
We will be putting out our annual survey results, but in terms of another major overhaul of INVEST, a similar project is in the works but will not be released this year, and more to come on that.
Oh, great, great. Any other questions from our audience? All right, Lauren, you got off easy, but I shouldn't say easy because you've been so busy tracking the different policies going in, and I know that's very difficult because things seem to change on a daily basis.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being with us. Just a couple of notes. We do have another webinar coming up. It's Post-Secondary Non-Completion Among Veterans, Contributing Factors and Implications, and that is going to be presented by Dr. Walter Ochinko, who is the Research Director at Veterans Education Success, and that will be on March the 21st, 2019, 1 to 2 p.m. Central, and there is the link to go to register. You can always go back and see our past MCMC webinars at the link here on the screen. And we always encourage you to contribute your successes at your institutions on our Facebook page, and there is the link to that as well. Again, if you have any questions, my name is Sara Appel, and I'm the manager of the Multi-State Collaborative on Military Credit. And again, thank you, Lauren, for chatting with us today and giving us some scoop on some things we might need to plan for in the future. So we appreciate it. And thank you for attending, and we will see you soon.